Hi, I'm Michael Lawson, author of The Periodic Table of Character Traits, the design elements to living your best life now. Over the course of some short videos, I will be sharing with you how to crack the code to living your best life now. Now, let me start by telling you why I even wrote the book. I have worked with countless number of individuals over the last 10 to 15 years. I have counseled them through very trying times, giving them new insights, seeing things in a different way. There's nothing special about what I do, but what I do is I care. I listen, I empathize, and then I look for ways to help them through a very challenging or difficult situation. Now, there are two ways to look at this. There is the secular worldview, and then there's the biblical worldview. Now, regardless of where you fall on the religious spectrum, we can all agree that character is the utmost important thing to one's life. It will help us gain a new perspective on things, to see things differently, that can really help us through challenging times. What we're going to be covering are many different character traits, and number one being honesty. But before we even get there, we must first get honest with ourselves. Meaning getting honest with yourself and taking full responsibility for everything that's happened to you. Or has it happened to you? You see, I believe that once we take ownership for our own actions, and instead of pointing the finger at something that happened because of someone else, we then gain control over that situation and thereby gain control of our lives. Now, you may be listening to this and you may not be in the best situation, and that's fine. I've been there. I have been at the very lowest points in my life at several different occasions. Years ago, well, actually over 20 years ago, when I was addicted to drugs. Yes, I said I was addicted to drugs. But because I hit rock bottom, I found faith in God. That's what helped me, right? And for you, that may not be what you will leverage, right? But you have to find something deep inside of you that calls out to you to demand that you do better. And not just do better, be better. And you've got to want it so bad. You've got to want it more than what somebody else wants it for you. And once you can make that shift, regardless of what it is, whether you've hit rock bottom with your finances, I've been there too. Years ago, me and my wife both lost our jobs within 3 months of each other. We were living in San Diego at the time, and we had absolutely nothing but unemployment. Unemployment to deal with a mortgage payment and 2 car payments, trust me, is not enough to get by in San Diego. But again, for me, I used my faith, I rested on my faith and leveraged that strength to get us through. Now, what happened was we decided that we would do more giving. Stop focusing on ourselves. The situation that we were in, it happened. We could have sat there and sulked the entire time, or we could have taken action, control, and owned it. And that's what we did. We gave more. We served more, and ultimately came out of that stronger than ever before. Stronger in our relationship, stronger in our relationship to God, and stronger in our relationships with those people around us. Now, I am not telling you that you absolutely have to believe in God. That is for me. But for you, you have to believe in something greater than yourself. You have to think that there is something greater than you that gives you purpose and meaning. And ultimately, You have to take responsibility for that. Now, I hope that this is a good introduction into the videos that I will be sharing with you. And again, we will start with honesty. And honesty means getting honest with yourself. Thank you. I look forward to sharing more with you. So today, I want to get into who's in control. You see, before we can even start talking about the character traits to living your best life, we need to understand who is in control, and more importantly, why. Now, before we even go there, what I want to talk to you about first is character and how we differentiate character. So for example, I love to use the analogy of fruit trees. So a fruit or a tree is known by the fruit it produces. You cannot tell me that an apple tree is not an apple tree if I am seeing apples and therefore then tasting them. And the same is true for a peach tree or a banana tree, if that's actually a tree. Somebody told me that's not one time. But anyway, a fruit tree is known by the fruit it produces. And just like me and you, we're known by what we produce. And what we produce is character. You are known by the character you produce in any given situation. And what's important to know is how you respond or react to these given situations. Now we're going to go back to the fruit tree. So imagine you are in an apple grove and there are a ton of apple trees. And you know these are apple trees because there's apples growing on them. But as you are walking down, you notice that there's a few trees that are withering and they don't look healthy. In fact, some of the fruit on them hasn't ripened. There's weeds growing and there's worms and stuff coming out of the apples, and you can see it rotting. Now ask yourself, which apple tree are you going to pick apples from? I'm sure the answer is you're going to pick the apples from the actual fruit-bearing tree that looks healthy and producing healthy apples. Now, let's carry this a little bit further. So just like the gardener has to take care of his fruit trees, so do you and I have to take care of ourselves. You see, the gardener has to make sure that he keeps the weeds away so they don't come and choke out the growth of the tree. He has to prune the branches that are infected or also can infect the good fruit. The same is true for you and me. You see, how we respond to situations is an indicator of what's inside of us. If you respond to outbursts of anger, hatred, fear, conceit, jealousy, you are being controlled by your emotions. You are not in control. So when I asked you earlier, who is in control? If you allow yourself to be ruled and controlled by those negative, or what I like to call destructive character traits, then you're not in control. And so we really have to take ownership and take back our lives. Take back those things that we know that we can control, and we have complete control over our emotions and how we respond to things. You see, it's easy to point the finger when something goes wrong. and say it's that person's fault that this happened, without looking internally and understanding our role in that situation. You see, if we can own it, we can control it. So again, who's in control? Is it you or your emotions? Welcome to video 3 to Cracking the Code. Today we're going to talk about honesty, but we're going to talk about honesty in real practical terms using 3 questions that get to the heart of first being honest with yourself. They are, who are you? What do you want to be? And what do you want? Do you even know who you are? What do people say when you're not in the room? A good reputation and being held in high esteem is more important than getting rich or having things that don't last. You see, people assign value to things that don't last all of the time. I should know because I was one of them. But how you treat people is more important than how they treat you. Who cares how they treat you? Don't let someone's mistreatment of you cause you to act outside of yourself. Maintain your integrity at all times and at all costs. Who do you want to be? Do you find that you are constantly comparing yourself with other people's successes or status in life? If the answer is yes, then you've already lost. If you're measuring yourself against some arbitrary goal of where you should be in life, you've already lost. You are so unique that there will never be, nor has there ever been, anyone like you or anyone that can do what you've been put here to do. And you will never discover what that is playing the comparison or deadline game. What do you want? I can't count the number of times that I've asked myself this question and replied with the most short-sighted answers, but yet when I acquired or achieved these ideal things, I was still left empty and unfulfilled. It reminds me of King Solomon of the Bible, who concluded when he said that it was all meaningless, empty like chasing the wind. Now, since money will not buy you happiness and neither will the accumulation of things, what's left? For me, I've always wanted to impact lives in meaningful ways, but my actions were saying something completely different because I allowed the noise of the daily grind and survival to take me off my path. At some point, you're going to have to stop chasing things that don't matter and assigning value to things that won't last to truly discover what it means to be living your best life now. Hi. Welcome to video number 4. Gotta start one more time. I didn't have it in the right spot. Okay. Welcome back. Welcome to episode, what the heck was that about? Okay, try one more time. Hi, this is video number 4. In today's session, we're going to cover compassion. But before we do, I want to make sure that you really spent the time answering the questions from our last session on honesty. So let me ask you, do you even know what people say about you when you're not in the room? It's not about caring what other people think about you. It's about who you are projecting to the world. What about your examination of how you assign value to things? Did you find that you compare yourself to other people more than you'd like to admit? And lastly, do you even know what you want or why you want it? Now, if you recall me saying that I've always wanted to impact lives in meaningful ways, but my actions were saying something different, well, that begs the question, do your actions align with your values? Or are you just kidding yourself? So you might be asking, how does compassion unlock the design elements to living your best life now? Well, I want you to think of it much like a combination lock where instead of using numbers or symbols, we are using a sequence of traits that we need to align in order to unlock your best life. So, what does compassion do, you might ask? It places the focus on someone other than yourself. Instead of thinking about what someone can do for you, start thinking about what you can do for them without expecting anything in return. You see, if you want to live your best life now, you cannot do it without being compassionate. There's just no way around it. And you can't fake it either. You see, compassion takes the understanding and the feeling of a situation and gives it wings. It gives it legs and muscles by turning those emotions into action by being present and accessible in any number of ways, such as an encouraging word, a helpful hand, an attentive ear, or a sounding board, or even a swift kick in the rear end. Now, there's a great debate in the Bible between faith and works that I'm reminded of, because if you only have the capacity to understand what someone else is going through, but you lack the motivation that propels you to go out of your way to actually do something about the mental, physical, or emotional pains of someone, then you're left with only one half of what is needed to truly be of service. Just to put this into perspective, it is of no good for you to feel a certain way about someone's plight if you are not moved with enough compassion to do something about it if you're able. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go out of your way to do everything you can for everyone you meet. That's just not practical. Just think what you can do with one small act of compassion. Are you ready to discuss? Imagine that you have all the resources and the ability to help a friend in need, and they come to you for help or advice. And you say something like, "Don't worry, I'm here for you, whatever you need. Don't hesitate to call or reach out." And you send them on their way without actually helping them. Or what about this one? You're with someone, whether that's through marriage, business partnership, or friendship, and things start to become difficult to the point where you are no longer present, you've disengaged and are no longer supportive. Now, remember, regardless of the relationship you entered into an agreement or a contract, if you will. It doesn't matter that if it is only a verbal contract or one that is never spoken yet mutually understood. Or what about the more formal agreements that we are more used to, like a marriage contract, where you agree to love through sickness and health, rich or poor, even until death do you both part. Now, before you think this is an indictment on marriage, let me remind you that in 2019, 50% of marriages in the US ended in divorce. Now, marriages end all the time for any number of reasons, and I'm not here to debate or condemn. I'm simply making the point that loyalty often comes with conditions and expiration dates. Now remember that unlocking the design elements to living your best life is like a combination lock where instead of using numbers or symbols, we're using a sequence of traits that we need to align in just the right order to unlock your best life. So, what do these stories have to do with living your best life? The answer is in the character we are going to cover next, which is loyalty. You see, loyalty is one of those high quality character traits that if you're not loyal, you've got nothing. It doesn't matter that you show compassion even when in times of need you're nowhere to be found, or you don't know what to say and you are not doing that thing you said you would do. I mean, think about that for a second. If nobody can count on you to do what you say you are going to do, what good are you? Loyalty is not a character trait of convenience or opportunity. You're either a loyal person, a person of high quality character that can be counted on, or you're not. Too many times in today's world, friendships end over petty quarrels and misunderstandings, and as you know, marriages are ruined because of loyalty that came with conditions. So you see, you cannot separate loyalty from honesty or compassion because they all go hand in hand. And here are 3 things you can do right now. Show up with honesty and compassion, be present in every moment, and stop overcommitting and start over delivering. You can do it. Welcome to the fairness video. I want to start this by telling a story. There was a business owner who had hired some workers to fulfill orders early one morning, and he agreed to pay them the normal going rate. Later, on his way to the store, he notices a few people with signs that read, "Will work for food." So he hires them and agrees them to pay them whatever is fair at the end of the day. He did this again at midday and also at 3 p.m. And by 5 o'clock that day, he noticed there was a few more people with the same signs. So he offered them the same deal. At the end of the workday, it was time to pay everyone. The business owner started with those that he hired at 5 o'clock and gave them a full day's wage. When those hired first came to get their pay, they assumed they would be paid more, but they too were paid a day's wage. Now, as you would imagine, they protested to the owner that people who only worked an hour should not have gotten paid as much as everyone who worked a full day. But here's what the business owner told them. He said, "I haven't been unfair to you. You agreed to work all day for the going wage, and that's what I paid you. I decided to pay the last workers the same as I paid you, which isn't against the law, so why should you be jealous that I'm kind to someone else?" Now, I know that you're probably thinking to yourself, that's not fair. Because we define fairness as something that should be equal and not to be a contradiction to accepted standards. You see, we know that to be fair really means to be in accordance with some rules or standards without cheating or trying to achieve an unjust advantage. But the question is, where do we get our sense of fairness? Who gets to set the rules or standards by which we can say something like, that's fair or is not fair? Now think back to the story I just told. That is actually a parable called the parable of the vineyard workers. And it was told by Jesus in the book of Matthew. Now, I love this story because it forces us to examine our own feelings towards fairness. You see, fairness without justice isn't fair. You see, justice is not an equalizer of condition. It is an evaluator of actions. Justice is supposed to provide a system for punishing those who violate fairness and righteous behavior, and yet we know that is almost always never the case. We all know deep down inside what John Rawls said when he stated, any inequalities that exist in a social system should favor the least well off, because this levels the playing field of society. Therefore, fairness ensures that we are being impartial without discrimination or favoritism, while justice is compelling us to right wrongs and help the oppressed. And so, here is my challenge for you. Ask yourself if you are always being fair and just. And if you're not, really sit in silence to understand why. Next, ask yourself if you always stand up for what is right. And if you don't, again, you'll need to sit in silence to understand why. Now, I'm sure you're starting to see that to unlock the design elements to living your best life requires deep introspective examination, which will be uncomfortable at times, but worth it. So stay with me as we continue to crack the code. So let's talk about respectfulness. I'm going to start by using a few scenarios. Let's say you're on a bus or a train or somewhere with limited seating, and in walks an elderly person or even an expectant mother. What do? Naturally, you get up and offer them your seat. Or what about when you're having a conversation or even an argument and the other person is still talking? What do? Hopefully you let them finish their thought, and yet we know that oftentimes that is not the case because we want to be heard so bad that we forget to listen. Or how about the simple yielding to authority? Not out of weakness, but out of respect. You see, we can be so consumed by how we feel or how it makes us look without any consideration for how we are actually disrespecting someone else. Now, do you know that the Greek word for respectfulness quite literally means to place a great value or high price on something? But here's what's interesting about that in today's world. We tend to place that great value or high price on ourselves more often than on the other person. You've heard people say, they don't respect me, so why should I respect them? Or respect is earned, not given. You see, this kind of thinking sets us up for all kinds of problems we see in our society today that can be avoided if we respect everyone the way we want to be respected. We all know how people, regardless of status, color, origin, or anything else, should be treated, and yet the challenge is in showing that respect when we feel that our personal rights have been trampled on, or what's more, when someone has mistreated or disrespected us. Now, I know it's hard, and I know it hurts, but we shouldn't leave our humanity at the door to act outside of ourselves and what we know to be respectful. Know this, when someone disrespects you, it speaks volumes to who they are and their hurt more than it does to their disrespect of you. And when you know who you are and whose you are, no one can disrespect you. So before we go any further, I think now would be a good time to recap where we've been and to see what's ahead. So here's what we've covered so far. We had the welcome video, followed by who's in control. And then we started turning the dials so that we could begin to unlock the code. There was honesty, compassion, loyalty, fairness, and respectfulness. So if you've read my book, then you will know that we're about halfway through. But what you don't know is that I've already started the work to the follow-up book, which I will be unveiling to you through this video series. So here's the rundown of what's to come. Humility, responsibility, kindness, integrity, love, peace, faithfulness. And then we take a detour into the destructive character traits that we want to avoid but must explore, as they too are important to unlocking the code. Traits like pride, anger, greed, jealousy, envy, and hate. But that just gets us through the book. What about Volume 2? Volume 2 will be where I will pick up where we left off, starting with completing the destructive trait, bitterness, followed by goodness, gentleness, joy, peace, self-control, and thankfulness. So that's what's ahead. I hope you stick around. So let's get into humility. Doing things in humility that values others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but the interests of others, instead of out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, is the quality characteristic that can change the world if we were all to embrace it. The greatest example of strength in humility that I try to model my behavior after, and by try, I mean fail all the time, is Jesus Christ. He came to serve and not to be served. This is a huge shift in attitude and posture for us self-centered, egotistical, self-righteous human beings who love to be praised, waited on, and felt special. At least I know that I'm talking to one person, me. Now, I know that it's not easy when people use you and mistreat you and even talk about you behind your back. But here's the antidote for that. Do good to those who mistreat you and talk about you behind your back. Want the best for them as you would for a friend. You see, the sun shines on both the good and the bad, just like the rain falls on the same. It doesn't change how the sun acts because someone doesn't like it or curses it because it's too hot. The sun just is. Now you may be thinking that's a silly comparison, but is it really? You mean to tell me that you will let someone mistreating you or talking about you behind your back cause you to act differently? Think back to video number 2 and ask yourself then, who is in control? You see, if we can get out of this I'm so important or I'm better than you mentality and really seek to add value to others with a spirit of humility, just imagine what that would look like. But it starts with me and you. So how do we do it? You must first radically change the way you think, and that starts with a careful examination of what's going into your mind, and you control that. So, don't be selfish. Stop trying to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourself. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. Talk about how each and every one of us has a superpower. And yet for many, you continue to abuse it, thereby making it virtually powerless. Now, the superpower I'm referring to is called responsibility. Being responsible means that you do not only do what you are expected to do, but you do what you say you're going to do. And you accept the consequences for your actions. Now, wait a minute. Do more than what is expected or asked of you? Now, if that sounds familiar, it should, because it is a biblical principle. So just how is responsibility, or being responsible, a superpower? I'm glad you asked. Because the doors that are open to you as someone who is responsible and can be counted on are not open to those who are proven to be irresponsible. Now, you've heard that to whom much is given, much more is required. But whether or not much has been given, as part of our duty to each other as humans, we all have a responsibility to give more than what is asked or expected of us. Have you ever noticed how hard it is to relate to someone who never owns up to their mistakes or feels they're ever wrong? You see, being responsible, it means that you are accountable for the outcomes of your actions. Think back to video 2, where we talked about who is in control. And ask yourself, who's in control of your actions? It's you. And since it's you, you are therefore responsible for the outcomes of your actions. This also means that you're responsible for your own happiness. You cannot put that on someone else. So once again, your happiness cannot and should not depend on someone else. Sadly, that is not always what we see playing out today. Instead, we see people avoiding personal responsibility, and it's usually through things like blame shifting and accountability dodging. We can go back to the beginning in the garden when Adam and Eve ate from the tree. They were forbidden, and as soon as Adam was confronted, he blame shifted when asked what he had done. He said, "It was the woman that you gave me," thereby implying that it was God's fault that he did exactly what he was told not to do because of the woman God had given him. Now, we hear this story, and it's so plain to us that Adam's behavior was wrong and cowardly, and yet we do it all the time in our own lives. We are quick to put the blame on someone or something else without taking any responsibility for our own actions in the matter. You see, responsibility is so important because it means that you are probably honest. And if you're honest, you're probably compassionate. And as someone who's responsible, honest, and compassionate, it's more than likely that you're also loyal and fair. And possessing all those traits, it would stand to reason that you would also be respectful, humble, and kind, which we'll be getting into in the next video. But the reason I say probably is because there are no absolutes. You either talk yourself into thinking that you're all these things until the pressure's on and what's really inside comes out. Or you really do end up unlocking the code to living your best life now, and what you discover is that life without a relationship with Jesus Christ isn't a life at all. What is kindness? The definition of kindness encompasses the qualities of being friendly, generous, and considerate. But you don't need me to stand here and tell you what it means to be kind. At some level, you instinctively just know. But authentic kindness is a personal decision, a choice. If you recall the video on humility, then you will quickly see how being kind and showing kindness is a selfless act. Choosing to be kind in the face of extremely difficult situations goes against our very nature, and yet that is when it is needed most. Since being kind is a choice, so is being unkind. Let that sink in for a moment. Since being kind is a choice, so is being unkind. When you are unkind, you are actually choosing to be unkind, whether you are doing it consciously or not. That thought alone should send chills down your spine and make you consider your actions. Why is being kind when we have been wronged so hard for us? The strength that you must muster up to be kind when you have been mistreated, unfairly punished, or accused of something you did not do is enormous, and not everyone can do it. But why? Your capacity to be kind, and above all else to forgive, is within you right now. But your ego will not let you express it. You see, your ego desperately wants to be vindicated and avenged for the pain and shame that you felt by being mistreated. And it will therefore work overtime on the physiological and psychological aspects of you until it has been satisfied, no matter the cost. And in the end, you just fell prey to the vicious cycle of tit for tat, the infliction of injury or insult in return for another. And for what? So you can feel good? It's hard to do good to those that hurt you and despise you, and even harder to want the best for them. But it is required of you. But here's the thing. You're not alone, and you don't even have to do this under your own strength, because quite frankly, you don't possess the strength nor the will. But I know someone who does. Jesus Christ. Did you know that he is waiting to fill you with everything you need? You see, while you may think it's the material things you need in this life to make your life complete, it's not. All you need is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And I guarantee that you will be living your best life. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, today I'm going to be unethical, untruthful, and unreliable. This does, however, happen over time, very slowly, as you allow yourself to subvert who you are at your core, to avoid the short-term discomfort to be satisfied in the moment. It's that sugar high when once it's over, you come crashing down. So what are we talking about? Integrity. Integrity is the practice of being honest and showing a consistent and uncompromising adherence to strong moral and ethical principles and values. Now, the general consensus is that integrity is about following your moral and ethical convictions and doing the right thing in all circumstances, even if no one is watching. Having integrity means you are true to yourself and would do nothing that demeans or dishonors you. Let me say that again. Having integrity means you are true to yourself and would do nothing that demeans or dishonors you. But did you catch that? I had to overemphasize the personal pronouns just to make my point. Because if we position ourselves as the moral arbiter of ethical principles and values, we run the risk of being consumed by the cultural norms of the day. Since cultures change as we evolve, doesn't it make sense to look to something that doesn't change just because our times do? And it can't be us, since we change all the time and can hardly be relied on because our feelings and emotions are the ones leading the charge. We could literally look to what is found in almost every religion and cultures from ancient Greek, ancient Rome, and Abrahamic religions. It's the golden rule, and it goes like this. Do not do to others that which angers you when they do it to you. Treat your inferior as you wish your superior to treat you. And do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Sounds easy enough. So why is it so hard for many of us to put this into practice? Ask yourself these questions. Do you ever feel put out when you have to keep a promise? Have you ever let someone else take the blame for your mistake to avoid getting in trouble? The American philosopher W. Clement Stone once said, "Have the courage to say no. Have the courage to face the truth. Do the right thing because it is the right thing. These are the magic keys to living your life with integrity." We've taken what love is supposed to mean as defined by Him who loved us first and twisted it, according to one definition, an intense feeling of deep affection, a great interest and pleasure in something. And if that's not convincing enough, there's the Merriam-Webster's definition that states love as a strong affection for another arising out of kinship or personal ties, affection based on admiration, benevolence, or common interests. But is there another definition we could look to? I personally love the Greek lexicon agapeo, which means to love, in a social or moral sense. Now, when speaking of persons, get this. It means to welcome, to entertain, to be fond of, to love dearly. And when speaking of things, it means to be well pleased and to be contented at or with a thing. Now, did you notice how there was no mention of our feelings? Imagine the biblical verse that says, "Love your enemies, do good to those who hurt and mistreat you," saying, welcome, entertain, be fond of, and love dearly your enemies. Do good to those who hurt and mistreat you. When we have a clear definition and understanding of love, we see the richness and depth of what it means to love those who don't love us or even want the best for us. I think we find it hard to love our enemies because we have an even harder time with forgiveness. As Martin Luther King Jr. argues in his book, Strength to Love, forgiveness is the defining factor in how much you can love your enemy. But does forgiving someone mean that there should be no consequences for their unjust actions? Of course not, but you already knew that. You see, we all have this real battle going on inside of us when we talk about love and forgiveness. And much has been said throughout the centuries, but let me take you back to November 17th, 1957, inside the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, where Martin Luther King Jr. is delivering his Loving Your Enemies sermon. Each of us is something of a schizophrenic personality. We're split up and divided against ourselves. And there is something of a civil war going on within all of our lives. There's an intractable south of our revolting against the north of our soul. And there's this continual struggle within the very structure of every individual life. There is something within us all that causes us to cry out like Ovid, the Latin poet. I see and approve the better things of life, but the evil things I do. There is something within all of us that causes us to cry out with Plato that human personality is like a charioteer with two headstrong horses, each wanting to go in different directions. There is something within each of us that causes us to cry out with Goethe. There's enough stuff in me to make both a gentleman and a rogue. There is something within each of us that causes us to cry out with the Apostle Paul, I see and approve the better things of life, but the evil things I do. Oh, to have been there in that room some 62 years ago. But let us not love in word only, but love in deed. That we would love with action and purpose, not just to those who love us, but also to those who don't. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about peace? Is it a time when there is no war, no pandemic, or what about when war has ended? In Greek, from a Christian perspective, peace is the tranquil state of a soul assured of its salvation through Christ. And so, fearing nothing from God and content with its earthly light of whatsoever sort that is. So let me ask you, are you at peace? What do people really want when they say they want peace? It can be difficult to know for sure. For example, the elderly neighbor who proclaims that they want peace from the teenager next door who's playing their drums late at night really wants quiet. So let me ask you this. Is peace the absence of worry? Worry being defined as giving way to anxiety or unease, allowing one's mind to dwell on difficulty or troubles. If you remove worry, are you at peace? Now, the Bible talks about a peace that surpasses all understanding, and I can tell you I know exactly what that's like because I'm experiencing it right now in this very moment. Like many of you, COVID-19 has struck my home as I will soon be unemployed, and yet I am at peace. I can't explain it, but to say that I am not anxious about tomorrow nor troubled by any uncertainty because I look back over my life and guess what? The Lord has continually delivered on his promise to never leave me or forsake me. And I got news for you. I'm nobody special, so it's not like this promise is only for me. The peace that comes with not just knowing God, but also walking with him will truly leave you dumbfounded and speechless, unable to adequately articulate the calm and tranquil state you're in, therefore leaving you with the only adequate response there is, thank you, Lord. So you got to be asking yourself, how do I get some of that peace you're talking about? I want a piece of the promise too. Well, I've got great news for you. Because if you're asking those questions or even others like it, then send me a message because I would love to connect with you, come alongside you in whatever way I can. See you in the next video. Let me paint the scene for you. A little child is standing at the edge of the pool while his father is in the pool with his arms stretched out wide, encouraging the child to jump, to have faith, believe that they will be caught. Now, you can tell that the child is trying to process all his options to jump and be caught by his father or jump straight to the bottom of the pool and drown. His knees are shaking as he looks out over the expanse of the pool, measuring the distance from his jump in the middle to the safety of the edges. When all of a sudden he takes a leap of faith and jumps, only to find himself in the awaiting arms of his father. That's faith in action. Or what about Abraham? When he was asked by God to sacrifice his only son to prove his love to God. Now, the best part of the story, which is recorded in Genesis 22:5, if you're interested, is when Abraham tells his servants before making the trek up the mountain, he says, stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you. Are you kidding me? He promises we will come back to you? That is some awesome faith in action. Abraham had faith that God would either stop him before he sacrificed his son, or God would bring his son back to life because of the promise made to him years before. Now, at some point in your life, your faithfulness will be challenged. Not to the degree Abraham's was, but you will be challenged nonetheless. But knowing that, we should not wait until we have our faith tested to decide who we truly are. Decide today, right now, that you will be a person of unquestionable faithfulness. That you will be true to the ideal you, to whom you were designed to be, to whom you have been called to be. But how do you even figure that out? You could ask your spouse, your best friend, mother, or father, but none of them will be able to provide you the level of understanding that you're looking for, like the one who so intricately designed you and equipped you would know. And if you want to know more about this or anything else, please send me a message, because I would love to connect with you, come alongside you in whatever way I can. See you next week. Well, we've reached that point in the series where it's time that we address the elephant in the room, as it were. And it's actually more than one. The elephant I'm referring to is known as destructive character traits, or elements of destruction. Because these are character traits that have no meaning or purpose in our lives except to hold us hostage to attitudes and emotions that, at the very core, are destroying us from the inside out. It's traits like these that are like a cancer and will destroy us and our relationships, and therefore they need to be eradicated, cut out. So the first character trait to be eradicated is pride. Now, you've heard the old proverb that says, pride goes before the fall. Well, the full version of that proverb really says, pride goes before destruction and arrogance before a fall. You see, the context for this proverb is actually more severe in nature, so let me just say this. We should take pride in what we do. And we should feel free to express pride over the accomplishments of loved ones. However, self-righteousness and conceit are very different matters altogether, because it places us at the center of the universe. Pride keeps us from admitting our failures and tries to take credit for things that God has accomplished in our lives. Pride prevents us from apologizing in order to mend relationships. Guilty. Pride keeps us separated from God. And lastly, and most importantly, pride prevents us from seeing our need for a Savior. Now, if you want to know more about this or anything else, please do not hesitate to send me a message, because I would love to connect with you and come alongside you in whatever way that I possibly can, because living your best life now is not nearly as meaningful or fulfilling as living your best life now in Christ. See you in the next video. Do you ever have strong feelings of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility? If so, then you've experienced the second destructive character trait called anger. Yes, we've all been there with that intense emotional state that involves strong, uncomfortable, and sometimes a hostile response to a perceived provocation, hurt, or threat. Now, I'm not implying that we cannot or should not get angry, but what we do with that feeling is what matters most, because it ultimately determines who is in control, you or your emotions. You see, anger ruins communication and tears apart relationships while destroying the joy and health of so many. You see, anger can be useful, but a prolonged release of the stress hormones that accompany anger can destroy neurons in areas of the brain associated with short-term memory, and it weakens the immune system. This is according to Psychology Today. Now, from a biblical worldview perspective, anger is God-given energy intended to help us solve problems. This is coming from two Greek words found in the New Testament for anger, meaning passion, energy, and agitated, boiling. But we have to be careful with anger because it can cause us to do some pretty bad things for which it may be very hard to come back from. When it is motivated by pride or distorts God's purposes, or better yet, when it is allowed to linger, is when it becomes the most dangerous. We have to be mindful that we don't let our anger become unpacified, meaning that we are unable to find or be at peace. You see, we should do our best to not hold grudges or keep things inside because of the effect it can have on us, such as irritability and depression over little things which are oftentimes unrelated to the underlying problem. You see, there is healthy anger, or what is also known as righteous anger. For example, victims of any number of traumatic events have every right to be angry, and we should also be angry. Sadly, we do not always stand up for the victims, whether that's another person or even ourselves. Get angry, but don't allow your anger to cause you to violate human decency or the sanctity of human beings to quench your thirst in the moment. Let me remind you that good things happen to bad people as much as bad things happen to good people. Because God allows all things to happen for His glory and His purpose, that He may redeem them for the good of His people. And if you want to know more about this or anything else, send me a message, because I would love to connect with you and come alongside of you and help you in any way that I can. See you in the next video. It was 1987. The movie was Wall Street, and the famous catchphrase delivered by Gordon Gekko was, "Greed, for lack of a better word, is good." Now, the only reason I am referencing a movie is to make the point that life does in fact imitate art, because we see corporate and political greed and it outrages us. And yet, we are blinded by the spotlight when it is put on our own greed. You know, the selfish desires to have more money, more things, more power. You see, the thing about greed is that it refuses to be satisfied. The more you get, the more you want. You've heard the phrase, money is the root of all evil. This idea stems from a biblical verse that says, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. That's found in 1 Timothy 6:10 for you note takers. The slight difference between these phrases is meant to show that money and wealth by themselves are neither good nor bad. The problem is our attitudes towards them. When we place our confidence in wealth or are consumed by an insatiable desire for more, we will fall. We know that Wayne Gerard Trotman is right when he said, instead of loving people and using money, people often love money and use people. Think about that. if you have relationships that are based solely on what the other person can do for you, you're not only selfish, but you're also greedy because you want more of something than is needed. We are in an amazing time in history with this COVID-19 pandemic, in that we have been given a glorious opportunity to do a top to bottom self-assessment. If you haven't taken advantage of this time, then I would encourage you to do it now. It's not too late, but there will come a time when it is. Why put off what you can do right now? You're in control. You always have been. Choose today that you will stop allowing these destructive character traits to control you. And if you would like to know more about this or anything else, then send me a message, because I would love to connect with you, come alongside of you, and help you and support you in any way that I can. See you in the next video. We are continuing with destructive character traits. And in this video, we're going to cover jealousy and how it generally refers to thoughts or feelings of insecurity, fear, and concern over a relative lack of possessions. When we allow these destructive emotions and feelings of lack to control the way we act, it causes us to think that another person is trying to take something away from us. Maybe a lover, a friend, or a possession. But on the other hand, when we wish that we could have the qualities or even the possessions that someone else has, we're being held captive by jealousy. And of course, that then begs the question that we asked back in video number 2, who's in control? But what if I were to tell you that jealousy could actually be a good thing, but only when it is expressed through the lens of the ultimate authority and source of love, God. You see, the Bible tells us early on that God is a jealous God, and when taken out of context, that can be very hard to comprehend. You see, He knows the hearts and minds of men, and therefore knows that our tendency is to stray and seek fulfillment, satisfaction, and pleasure in things outside of Him. You know, things like your job, your money, your possession, and the list goes on and on, where your relationship to God then takes a backseat. Now, there's a reason God tells us not to covet what other people have, like your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's possessions, or anything your neighbor has, because He is sufficient for all of your needs. It's like you're thumbing your nose at what God has given you because what He has given someone else instead. Now, you may be thinking to yourself that I don't actually want what my neighbor has. But what about your neighbor's lifestyle? You may not covet the actual thing, but do you want what that thing represents instead of focusing on and being grateful for what God has already blessed you with? Think about that. And if you want to know more about this or anything else, then I would love to hear from you. Simply send me a message so that I can come alongside of you and support you in any way that I can. Continuing on in the destructive character traits, we now come to envy, which is the opposite coin of jealousy. Kind of almost the same, but are they really? You see, envy is the reaction to lacking something that another person possesses, where jealousy is a reaction to the fear or threat of losing something or someone we possess. Envy is the distress or resentment we feel when others have what we do not have. Jealousy is the sense of dread or suspicion we feel when what we have might be taken away. Now, let's look at envy by taking you back to the very beginning where envy led Cain to kill his brother Abel, because God looked with favor on Abel's sacrifice but didn't accept Cain's. You see, the effects of envy unchecked here had catastrophic and devastating results. And if you recall how enraged Saul was over the success in battle and the popularity of David and what that ultimately did to him, that is recorded in 1 Samuel. So again, envy unchecked has devastating effects that lead to spiritual, emotional, and physical death. We envy because we want what we cannot have, so there is this sense that we are lacking something that is found in someone or something else. Think about that for a moment. We can be so dissatisfied with what God has blessed us with that we envy what others have. Really think about that for a moment. That God has blessed each and every one of us so uniquely that we are fine-tuned for our mission, and yet we envy the gifts, talents, possessions of others. Do not let your envy go unchecked, but sit and reflect and be thankful for the fine-tuned individual that you are, and thank God that there is no one like you, nor will there ever be, and what you have to offer the world will never be found while you're jealous or envious, prideful, greedy, bitter, or hateful. Now, if you want to know more about this and anything else, please send me a message, because I would love to come alongside you and support you in any way that I can. See you in the next video.